We are on the verge of a momentous worldwide event that will alter everything. This may be interpreted as clickbait or as just saying, oh, he's trying to get clicks or get people to watch this. However, a major world event that will bring about a new system, a new financial system, is very, very close. And I believe that everything actually kind of starts with the sanctions in 2022 and even before that, back to 2008 or whatever. However, there is a lot to discuss and a lot to cover in this video. Welcome to Peepo Coin channel, everyone, and take a seat back and unwind. If you're new to the channel, you will become a subscriber by the end of this video. Let's begin with the trade war and tariffs, shall we? China and the US have been exchanging back and forth recently. Additionally, the US has been quite outspoken about what's going on here, particularly through the Chinese embassy in the US. And it's evident that there is a significant response to the tariff talks that the United States is beginning to make to China. Thus, we have the bullion inch here. In the face of US aggression and imperialism, he will stand his ground. Keep this in mind. Thus, once more, we can observe the back-and-forth conflict and the mounting strain. And the reason for this is because China increased import duties to 125% on US goods. This also happened after we increased the duties on Chinese goods to 145%. Once more, the trade war and tariff talks between several major countries are beginning to intensify. Regarding China, I mostly examine the BRICS and their responses to the situation. I genuinely expect this to continue because of the sanctions and the strong opposition to the US dollar that we have been seeing. I believe that we are living in a de-dollarization era, and many people maintain that there is no need for concern. The problem with that is that there isn't anything to be concerned about just yet. However, I do believe that de-dollarization attempts will eventually reach a stage where we should be concerned. First and foremost, though, I want to discuss what the major actors have to say, also known as BlackRock. Accordingly, BlackRock recently predicted that inflation in the US would be far higher. This was also related to Larry Fink's remarks on CNBC, when he claimed that the United States is on the verge of going into a recession and perhaps already be in one. Ever since President Donald Trump announced massive tariffs last week, which caused the stock market to plummet, our concerns about an economic slowdown have increased significantly. Since we now have a 90-day halt on the reciprocal tariffs, I believe that everyone will just slow off until there is greater assurance. Longer, higher levels of uncertainty result from such. Notwithstanding his economic worries, the CEO of BlackRock stated that he did not believe the United States was experiencing a financial crisis and that significant economic advances such as artificial intelligence would continue. Now, the real point I want to make here is that we redefined what a recession is. Okay, so 2 quarters of GDP growth were negative, and we already have it. In actuality, we received it around 2 or 3 years ago. In reality, it was somewhere in 2022 or early 2023. And if we are considering that, what have we been seeing ever since, We've been seeing a lot of suffering in certain industries. For instance, banks began closing in 2023. And many people still claim that it was mostly cryptocurrency banks. In fact, it wasn't. A large number of regional banks were also closing their doors at the time. Obviously, it had a significant impact on the banks. We didn't really notice much of that at the time because, cryptocurrency was still booming, and Bitcoin had the opposite effect of the large banks closing. But now that we're hearing about recessions, everyone is asking themselves, haven't we been in one? Because even today, when we consider a recession, I'm sure many of you are thinking, well, we've been in one before. For some time now, we have been claiming that we are in a recession, because once more, they have already altered what constitutes a recession. It is also quite comparable to inflation. As for CPI data, I've always claimed that they're in line with us because they don't really take into consideration things like electricity, petrol prices, or even half of the necessities like food. The majority of stuff isn't really factored into the CPI numbers, Therefore, the majority of what we are currently seeing in the economy is ultimately fraudulent. And because of 2008, they actually learned how to fabricate a lot of that data. However, while we listen to these recession speeches and discussions today, we take a look back at this Anderson video that was uploaded. Many people will now respond, well, this was 6 years ago, since once more it was April 10, 2019. I don't bring this up because it's old news, but I want you guys to realize that every time a major crisis strikes these markets, you can go back to the early ones before the internet even existed, and usually something is brought about. Any significant change is accelerated by them. Here, nothing occurs until a world crisis strikes. Take a look at this. However, I find it difficult to believe that it will occur within the next few years. Clearly, it's something that will happen in the future. Hopefully we can get to that state without going to war. That would be sincerely hoped for. It goes without saying that these markets have repeatedly seen the worst crises. And I'm not just referring to cryptocurrency, am I correct? I'm referring to the actual financial markets, such as the stock market. You know they don't go undetected. For instance, statements like "don't let a good crisis go to waste" have been used in the past. That is what they have repeatedly said in the past. Although 2008 was a significant catalyst for significant advancements in the system, many problems remained unresolved. For example, if we go back to 2008, many of the issues that existed then still exist now. As we all know, the fractional reserve banking system is a huge fraud that really contributes to the occurrence of these crises. Furthermore, as I've mentioned on this channel, we haven't really made any progress since 2008. Yes, there have been some minor innovations such as the adoption of ISA 2002, and some changes such as the UI of payment apps. But nothing major has changed in terms of the underlying rails and everything else outside of minor upgrades, because these markets haven't actually experienced a major crisis. For this reason, we believe that these markets will likely experience a significant crisis at some point. What we're looking at is a worldwide occurrence. Now, if you consider it, we already have the surroundings for this. For instance, I have been observing the dollar's decline over the past few weeks, although technically it dates back to January 13th. In addition to this though, I've been seeing gold soar. We now know that the dollar's recent collapse is highly bullish for asset risk, but why is gold so high? Usually when something breaks, gold soars. Alright, if we travel back in time to 2008, you know this was the greatest thing ever. When it was at its lowest it was soaring, and now gold is soaring as well. Therefore, within the next 12 months something significant is going to happen in these markets. 12 to 24 months, give or take. In fact, a lot of individuals are now concentrating on. For instance, the Kibisi letter claims that gold prices are skyrocketing if something is broken but you can't tell. Additionally, Gold Telegraph published a commentary about the Fed, stating that in the event of breaking news, the Fed would undoubtedly be ready to use its force to keep financial markets stable. There we have it. A new GT conversation will be released shortly. According to Susan Collins, the U.S. Central Bank was ready to take action with the different tolls. What are those tolls now? The printer press, that is. Their goal is to print more currency. According to a top official, the Federal Reserve is fully prepared to assist with market stabilization if necessary. Using the several mechanisms, the U.S. Central Bank got ready to take action. Once more, they are attempting to inform us that the markets are still operating smoothly, and that there aren't any general liquidity issues. However, she asserted that if issues with market functioning or liquidity should emerge, the central bank is equipped to handle them. Have had to swiftly deploy a number of tools, in reference to previous actions taken to alleviate market chaos, she told Financial Times. Without a doubt, we would be ready to do that if necessary. And this reminds me a little. Once more, this is something that was overlooked when the banks began to fail in 2023. In actuality, Japan was under a lot of hardship at the time. Additionally, if you recall, their currency was beginning to depreciate. What took place? Well, Japan was bailed out by the Fed. Now, if it sounds crazy, it's because Japan is the biggest debtor of the United States. Because the largest U.S. debt holder was on the verge of going bankrupt, we bailed them out. Well, that was in 2023. It's no different today. Even with the ongoing tariff talks and the escalating trade war, Japan is still under a lot of stress. Additionally, on the 11th